Hi everyone, welcome to After Class,
a podcast by two passionate adult ballerinas about all things adult ballet related.
and some random thoughts in between.
We're so glad you're here.
So grab your water bottle
Or a cup of coffee.
and join us for a quick chat after class.
Hello, dancers. Welcome to another episode of After Class. A couple weeks ago, I did a poll on social media asking you guys what are your biggest pain points in your ballet training. And a topic that was submitted multiple times was turnout. So today's episode is going to be all about turnout. And since I am admittedly not at all an expert on this subject, I struggle with turnout every single day. I am so excited to be joined by Chelsea Weidmann, who is the founder of the Geeky Ballerina. And she is a professional ballet teacher who is certified in the American Ballet Theater National Training Curriculum, Progressing Ballet Technique, and the Move Method. And she is passionate about teaching methodology, ballet history, anatomy, and educational philosophy, just to name a few things. And she has great expertise to bring to this conversation about turnout. So welcome to the podcast, Chelsea.
Thank you. I'm so excited to be here. And listen, we all struggle with turnout, like everybody. So
Yeah.
welcome to the club.
Yeah, it is brutal. I often wonder, do professional dancers ever hit a point where they feel like my turnout is just great and I'm so happy with it? Or is that just a constant struggle?
I mean, I don't have great turnout either, but I have friends who are very accomplished principal dancers, and they're like, I only use a flat fifth if it's an audition.
Yeah.
Oh,
Yeah, just get me in and then I can use my normal comfortable fifth. I know. I'm like, oh gosh, it's hard. And I think especially for adults, if you didn't train as a child, getting your body to accept a position that is not natural is really challenging. So I'm glad that I'm not the only one. When everyone was submitting that as a topic they wanted to talk about, I was like, yes, I agree. Let's do this. We need to talk about this. So glad to have you here. So maybe you could start by telling us a little bit about yourself, your dance background, and your platform.
sure. So I took my first ballet class when I was 4, and it was like a jazz ballet combo in like a rec center thing, and I hated it. It was a very chaotic environment, did not enjoy it. And I think that was the end of that. And then when I was in 5th grade, I saw a jazz competition team perform and decided I wanted to take dance lessons. So I started with jazz, and then I realized you need to take ballet. So when I was 12, I took my first ballet class. And then when I was 13, I switched to just ballet because it turns out that I love it. I've done the certifications that you mentioned. About 10 years ago, I got my MFA, which technically is in interdisciplinary arts and was supposed to have a choreography focus. I don't love choreographing. So I did like the minimum requirements, but the part of my master's work that I'm most proud of is my thesis, which was looking at different elements of artistry and how we can teach them, which has now evolved into Artistry Inside Ballet Technique Volume 1, which I published almost a year ago, 9 months, something like that. There are 2 more volumes yet to come. I'm still working on those because I loved the research and I haven't found that information anywhere, so I figured I'd write it.
I listened to you on another podcast talking about artistry and the work that you did in that thesis, and it is absolutely fascinating. Maybe in the future we could have you back on just to talk about artistry. I would love to do that.
Absolutely.
Hey, adult dancer. Do you love the podcast and want more resources, news, and tips to support your ballet goals? Head over to thebusybunhead.com, your source for all things adult ballet. Stay in the know, find community, and fuel your motivation with resources like the bulletin board, a free monthly newsletter, and the Bunhead Book Club. Brand new to ballet? Book a session to get your questions answered. It's all waiting for you at thebusybunhead.com. One of the things I would love to start with in the conversation with turnout is this connection. You talked about it in a recent newsletter between how turnout has evolved in ballet history and how that correlates to the progression of how it's taught. So would you mind kind of sharing a little bit about that? Because I thought it was such a fascinating connection that you made.
Yeah. If you look at the beginning of ballet, you have ballet de corps. It was done just in the courts in France. It wasn't professional yet. I have not been able to track down why turnout evolved yet. I've seen a couple of different theories. They're both pretty easy to poke holes in. So I don't know why we decided to turn out. But when the aristocracy was doing it, they weren't sweating. They're not going to push their turnout. And so you have very like minimal turnout. It's almost like 45 degrees sort of. And that's what we use with our really young kids. Partly because if we can just keep them doing the right thing at the right time, it's a total win. And balance is hard, and we don't want to be overly aggressive with their hips because everything is still so malleable. That's a really hard line to walk, developing turnout without overstressing. But so the foundations, the pre-ballet, anybody under about age 7 or 8, in my mind, that turnout correlates with what they were doing in ballet de corps. And then we move into the Romantic era. We have professional dancers. Turnout is becoming more expected. It's becoming a greater range of motion, but it's not expected to be flat. And this is where we get into what I call the elementary level of training, which is about the first 3 years of formal training. So to translate that for adults, if you as an adult walk into my class as a beginner off the street, never had a ballet class in your life, I would put you in level 2. I actually would skip level 1. I just don't think adults need it. So beginning adults, ballet dancers are right in that kind of romantic era where we want the turnout. We're going to strengthen the muscles. We're going to show off the lines that this creates, but we don't really need to push it. And then the next ballet history era is the classical era, which is sometimes called the Russian classical era. And that's when the really exquisite technique, the flat turnout, the 32 fouettes, that's when that really came in. And to me, that correlates really well with the intermediate level of training, because these are, if you're working with children, these are the kids that are getting ready to go do summer programs at a bigger school. And if you're working with adults, these are the people who have invested years and they have really developed the somatic awareness, the strength, the flexibility, and they really have a lot of cool things to show off.
It's such a great way of understanding it. And I think that, I don't know, I wish that there was almost like a section of class time. Like if we could make classes 15 minutes longer and talk about ballet history at the beginning of class, I feel like that would be great. I don't know if everyone would like that, but I would like that.
I love it.
Yeah, I think it's so interesting. But one of the things that I think is difficult about being an adult dancer, and I'm sure you've noticed this too, is I think sometimes for adults it's hard because we're entering into maybe an open level class or, whatever we can get from the limited classes that are offered. And so it's almost like we're skipping those first couple steps and you see adults coming in that just go straight into feeling like they need to force 180-degree turnout because that's either what the teacher expects or what they're seeing when they look around. And so I think for adults, it's good to understand that if you had been learning from the time you were a child, you would be getting to kind of progress through these stages of developing your turnout. But for adults, a lot of times we go straight into this feeling like we have to force it into flat turnout. And so I just think that that's a unique challenge of starting ballet as an adult.
Yes, absolutely. I think it also showcases sort of a misunderstanding about turnout. Turnout is not a goal. Turnout is a tool. And so you use the tool that you have. If you're building something and you need a hammer, somebody might have like a really nice titanium head hammer. I have, true story, I've used a chunky heeled shoe before. You use what you have. The tool that you use is not as important as the product, the art, the enjoyment that you create.
Yeah, which I think leads perfectly into talking about what role does turnout really play in ballet technique for adults. I think you kind of started to touch on it, and how important is it really to get that flat turnout? Because like I was saying earlier, I think adults come in sometimes and just looking around or based on the cues that the teacher's giving, you're immediately put in this pressure of like, I have to get my turnout flat. But is that really that important for adult dancers? Like what amount of weight should be put on that in training for someone who's starting as an adult?
Flat turnout is not at all important. The only people who need flat turnout are people with professional ballet aspirations. So you can just check that right off your list. What I want when I teach adults is I look at alignment. So we want the pelvis in a very particular place so that we can engage the core. And then I want you to use the range of motion that you have. Not that you have forced, but that you can get to, that you can move with, and that will get better over time. But turnout makes some of the vocabulary easier. And in other ways, it's just an aesthetic standard.
Which is so freeing, I think, to look at it that way. Because I think sometimes, I don't know, this is probably a controversial opinion. I've said this on the podcast before, but I think as an adult, like, yes, we want to be taken seriously. We want to advance. We want to get as good as we can. But I think for me personally, and I think there are other adults that feel this way, you hit a point where I'm just not willing to crank my turnout, have my knees hurt, and just go so hard to get this look. Like, I'm just like, I'm not willing to do it.
Yeah.
Like,
Nor should you be. You need those knees for the rest of your life.
totally. And I think that that's, where that tension comes in for a lot of adults is like, I want to look like a serious dancer, but like, I don't want to sacrifice hurting myself physically, feeling uncomfortable, feeling like I can fake it while I'm standing, but then as soon as I start moving, I'm losing it. And so I think it's just something that I think as adults, it's like, I don't want to say that you just give up and quit trying, but I do really appreciate, what you said about it's not that important in the scheme of like wanting to learn how to do ballet and do it well. Like flat turnout is not something that will make or break. Can you be a good ballet dancer as an adult? But I think a lot of adults, it's almost like we need someone to give us that permission.
I could make a whole list of things that you can do well to look like a serious ballet student that don't involve your turnout. Would you like the list?
Yes, I would love the list, actually.
Okay. So foot articulation is one. If you can tendu and use a half point, that's a great indicator. The ability to engage the muscles around your knees, to lift those kneecaps, that's another really good one. The level pelvis we talked about, that lifted posture where you're tall and long through your waist, but you're not lifting in the shoulders is another one. A well-shaped port-de-bras will make you look so refined. Smiling makes a big difference. I think that turnout is what people latch onto because it's something that the entire public understands. It's almost like the image of an arabesque. It just comes to mind when you think of ballet. But once you get in the studio and you start watching people move, it's just part of the picture. It's not the center of it.
Yeah, I wish I could remember who it was, but I heard not too long ago a professional dancer talking about turnout and just about the illusion of it all and how, like, if you were to stand in the wings and watch me dance, I'm not dancing with flat turnout. It's more about the picture you're creating to an audience than it is about like, oh, is my turnout technically flat, when you're out there doing a show. And so I thought that was really interesting because I think being so in the classroom for adults, like so much of our dancing, stuff for some of us, all of our dancing is only classroom based. It's not performative. It's just in that environment. And so there's this like emphasis on very technical perfection and less about performing and artistry, which I'm hoping that continues to evolve for adults as there's more opportunities for them to perform and do things like that. But yeah, it is interesting. Like you said, it's like turnout is this thing that I think we tend to just associate with ballet. And so we kind of latch on to it. But I think it can cause a lot of mental roadblocks for people as they're advancing and learning to dance because you feel like, oh, if I can't get this, am I not progressing? But I love that you're shared other things that are better indicators of progress and where you are than flat turnout.
Yeah. And flat turnout is not a possibility for most people. It takes really shallow hip joints. Let's not mess with your bones.
Yeah, it seems like fighting anatomy at a certain point is just going to like make us all sad and defeated.
Yeah, let's not do that. Like we have bones that are not riddled with osteoporosis at the moment. Awesome. Let's do it. And if we are a little bit osteoporosis-y, let's be careful, but those sautés are probably going to help you.
Which is actually perfect lead in because obviously we as dancers, I think every dancer believes in the ability to improve. Otherwise, you probably would not want to do dance and come to class every day. So knowing that there probably is room for improvement, even if you can't get to 180 degrees, and that's not even anatomically desirable for most of us. What would you say are some ways that adults can safely work to improve their turnout from wherever they are now?
The most important thing is to stretch your hip flexors. which people don't think of because they're not one of the external rotators. But when the hip flexors are tight, it either will pull the thigh, the femur, up towards your midline, or it will pull the top of your pelvis down towards the femur. So what it ends up doing is if you have tight hip flexors, your pelvis rolls forward a little bit. And so the opening of the hip joint is tilted downwards, and we can't actually get into the rotation as well. And that also is why a lot of people end up with sort of tight backs, because the hip flexors are tight because we sit all day. And then when we walk around, the pelvis is pulled forward a little bit, but our spine and our brain don't want to be tilting forward. And so the lower back will contract to keep us upright. And it kind of creates this little tension chain. That is the most effective way to get into turnout. I'm forever preaching the importance of working on your hip flexors.
So what would that look like in terms, like, are there common exercises? I know with a podcast, we can't visually show, but are there common exercises, whether they're ballet related or just stretches, that really help?
Yes, the yoga pose that comes to mind first is cat grabs its tail. But that puts a lot of pressure on people's knees. And as people get older, especially people who don't want to grand plie because of their knees, that is not a good option for them. For that same group of people, like standing on one leg and catching your foot behind you is also not great because the degree of knee flexion is just very uncomfortable. So the one that I find most people can do, and I like to do it with my hand on a bar or on the wall, just for balance. I don't want to worry about my balance when I'm stretching. So I come into a high lunge. Make sure you're parallel. Your hip flexors stretch most efficiently in parallel. And we're talking about turnout, but don't right now. But you come into a high lunge. The back heel can be on the ground or off. It doesn't matter. But in that shape, you contract your glutes because your glute muscles are on the opposite side of your body as your hip flexors. So if you contract what's on the back, you tend to stretch what's on the front. And then from there, you can start leaning back in your upper body, tilting to one side or the other, and it starts to get into that. Once the hip flexors aren't really gripping onto tension regularly anymore, that's when people can start getting into, how do I increase my actual turnout, my actual external rotation? And I was always taught like the frog stretch. I don't teach it myself. I don't do it anymore, because what I have found is that the frog stretch, for some people, in my experience, it's probably about 30% of people, pulls the pelvis into a weird place. So you're stretching muscles that, like, you're stretching the muscles in an alignment you're not going to use. So it's not as efficient. But what I have found is that a box split works, which is basically making a rectangle. So it's kind of like a grand plie in second position. Your knees are theoretically straight out from your hips and your ankles are straight down from your knees. So we've got some right angles going on. You're going to put your knees and your heels on the ground and let your hips go as high as they need to. That, in my experience, is more achievable for all bodies. And I gained at least a half inch of turnout in my 30s because I've discovered this difference. But it's also not comfy, especially until you get enough turnout to get off that inner edge of your kneecaps. So the first time you do it, you need to be doing it on padded carpet so that you can figure out, do I want to put a couple couch cushions under my knees? You need to be comfortable, but it's really efficient. You only need to stay there for 30 to 60 seconds. So that's the turnout specific stretch that I recommend to everyone.
I love that. Yeah, and I'll include the link in the episode description to your YouTube video showing that so that people can go and follow along. What advice do you have for adults, or even just ways of thinking about maintaining their turnout as they're working through combinations? Because I feel like that's a lot of times where, I know for me personally, we can maybe feel it while we're standing, we're not moving. And then as soon as we start moving or doing tendus or rond de jambes, that's when we start to feel that standing heel slip back a little bit and start to lose it. And so are there cues or tips that you tend to give to adult dancers to help with that?
Yes, I have 3 that have popped into my head. The first one is, give yourself credit, because this is how everybody starts. It is easier to find these muscles. It is easier to notice these muscles and engage them when we're standing still.
Yeah.
And awareness is the first step to developing somatic awareness. You are already more accomplished than you were a month ago. So credit. In terms of bar work, what ended up being really transformational for me was to think of the hip on my supporting side as wanting to go the same direction as my working leg. So if my left leg is going to tendu devant, my right hip is going to try to go forward with it. If it's going derriere, my right hip is going to try to go back. That imagery helps me and other people, once I learned about it and shared it, it helps us to stay square. And then we are strengthening, it's mostly the glute medius, which is not a rotator, but it's a really powerful stabilizer. And then when you're stable, it becomes easier to use your turnout. I'm going back to say, number one, point B is give yourself credit, because the muscles to maintain turnout throughout movement are never the muscles the body was designed to use moving that direction. And so it takes longer. Because adult dancers are so smart, they understand the concept faster than muscles can physically build the strength. And the third one, which really is probably the most practical of the tips, Joan Lawson, in one of her books, wrote about first position of the feet and the arms as the gateway. And you want to pass through the gateway as often as possible. So if you're doing a glissade, even though it starts and finishes in fifth, there are two secret first positions in there. There's the first position as your first leg brushes to the side, and then there's another one as your second leg closes. Or if you're doing a tombe pas de bourrée into fourth, so that you can pirouette, you have tombe pas de bourrée, secret first to your fourth ray. Every time you can find those secret first positions, it brings your body back to that familiar place where it can go, oh, I know what I'm doing. And it helps you to realign the pelvis so that you can get into your turnout, and it just helps that muscle memory trigger. So I am forever squawking at people to find their secret first.
I love that, though. That's such a great cue, because at least for me, I find that there's so much going on in class. The things that I'm able to latch onto in the midst of a combination with music playing and people around me are things like that, where it's just a few words like secret first position. I love that, because I think those are the things that are practical for latching onto and actually using in a dance class when things are going crazy. Like, we need those little trigger words, cues.
Yeah.
So thank you for that. I'm sure a lot of people are going to benefit from that tip. Where are kind of the primary platforms that people can follow you, connect with you, and get information from you and the things that you're involved in?
To the best of my knowledge, I am the only person using Geeky Ballerina. So you can find me there. I have a website where I have a blog that I update weekly. I post weekly YouTube videos. I do a little bit on Instagram and Facebook, but not very much. I am a little bit more active on TikTok, but I do really enjoy responding to people's questions. I really just want to help as many people as possible feel joy in my happy place, except it's our happy place, because it's not just for me. It's for everybody. It's for everybody who wants to be there.
Yeah, I totally agree. Could not agree more. It really is for everyone. And I will definitely link everything so that people can find you in the show notes. Thank you so much for being with us today, Chelsea. It was so fun having you, and I really hope that you guys enjoyed the episode. And if you did, we'd love if you could take a moment to leave us a review. It really helps other dancers find us, and we read every single one. See you next week for a brand new episode. Bye.
Thank you for listening to After Class.
Join the community on YouTube and Instagram, or come dance with us, our weekly Zoom classes for adult ballerinas like you.
Links included in the episode description. Special thank you to our sponsors.
See you next time after class. Podcast produced by Mission Bridge Media.